Well, hello and welcome to the latest iteration of the Blueprint Industry Roundtable series. My name is Charles Sword, and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Blueprint Systems, and will be the moderator for today's discussion. Today's discussion is focused on the need for universal RPA standards, and we've assembled quite an illustrious panel to help us discuss that topic. Today, almost every organization is leveraging RPA technology to drive their digital transformation. And as the underlying technologies both mature and proliferate, more than ever, there is a need to create interoperability to accelerate and scale these solutions. At Blueprint, we are firsthand witness to these challenges as our universal automation design platform integrates with all the major process discovery and mining tools, as well as the RPA execution platforms, to help organizations identify, prioritize, design, and accelerate delivery of high quality automations. That's why we are sort of central to driving the discussion around the emergence of a set of RPA standards. Joining us today for that discussion is truly an outstanding set of folks that can represent a diverse set of views on RPA standards. That includes Frank Catone, who has over 20 years of technology experience that spans both sales and delivery responsibility across multiple industries, including the last 20 plus years at Avanade, where he's the global lead for intelligent automation. Taulli. Tom is the author of the Robotic Process Automation Handbook, a guide to implementing RPA systems, but is also an entrepreneur who has started several technology companies and acts as an advisor to many large corporations. We're also joined by Tim Kulp. Tim is the Chief Innovation Officer at Mind Over Machines and is focused on delivering solutions that combine the power of technology and the potential of humans to enable the world to work smarter. And Nandan Mullakara, who is a seasoned technology executive who most recently was head of robotic process automation during a 10-year stint at Fujitsu, and also is the driving force behind Bot Nirvana, which is fast becoming the most influential community of RPA professionals. So thank you, gentlemen, for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us for today's discussion. I look forward to a dynamic, compelling discussion on this notion of RPA standards. And thank you to all who have joined this webinar. I hope you find it a great use of your time. So with no further ado, I'd like to jump right in and start this discussion. And if I could, Frank, maybe I'll toss the first one to you. The RPA market has been evolving quite considerably in recent years. Where do you think the market is today, and what are the primary challenges organizations are experiencing in their automation initiatives?
Yeah, thank you, Charles, and hello, everyone. Hello, panelists. Good to see you guys again, and happy to be here. So, it's kind of interesting, right? The maturity for most organizations is kind of at different points, but from a market perspective, it feels to me, and it feels to us, given the body of work we do across the world with our clients, it feels like we're getting into the stage of as much task-based automation as there is in most organizations. That's been wrung out already. And so the really next cut of where this intelligent automation spectrum is starting to go is, what can we do? What can clients do to add a little more judgment, to get a little bit more sort of value, higher value in and around some of their business process automation? So it feels like an awful lot of, rule-based, let me do the if then, let me do the Excel posting in and out, all that sets of stuff most organizations have somewhat of a hand on. Is it scalable? Has it grown? Has it matured? Could there be some additional stuff that can go into that? For sure. But this next cut of what can we do to add some more intelligence and really wring out business value is certainly where we see the market. And we're super excited about where it is. And listen, I hate to do this, Charles, but real quick, super excited about Blueprint, right? I mean, the way you folks think about digital blueprints and thinking about process, that certainly helps stage for this next evolution of intelligence, right? It's the ability to do that living process set of activities going forward. So I think the market's in great shape. I think the direction of the tech, the tools, the ecosystem is in great shape. And I think folks like yourself are making it easy for clients to think about that next gen of intelligent automation.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Frank. It's certainly a fast moving field. And, and most recently, we're seeing organizations start to reconsider some of their decisions as it relates to even RPA providers, as some platforms mature faster than others. Tim, you're helping drive a lot of these solutions out in the field. Where do you see the state of the market and the challenge of, leveraging the power as we introduce you, the power of these solutions, but also incorporating the human element into these solutions?
Yeah, thank you, Charles, for having me today. Where we see is a lot of people still in this discovery phase of what can these technologies actually do. Like we see the marketing material and we see, kind of what's really happening, and, what we're experiencing out in the market is somewhat of, refer to it as the trough of disillusionment. It's, you have the marketing material saying, this is all the stuff that you can do. And then people experience reality. There's a lot it can do, but there's this disconnect between expectation and reality. And what we see with the human element especially is really focusing on managing those expectations, really making sure that you manage the expectations at the leadership level who are making the decisions and the investments, but also in the workforce level where you're really focusing on, here's your role, here's how you're a part of this, here's how you're going to be empowered with this technology. And that's a real key element that a lot of times with technology, people are like, technology, and they just throw it at people. You want to make sure you're empowering your humans along the way to get the maximum return on investment in your engagements.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. To sort of thinking about the maximizing those investments, Nandan, this notion of standards, we've seen standards drive many of the major technology innovations over the past 50 years, really. Why do you think we haven't reached that point in RPA, and why hasn't this been addressed by some of the major providers?
Yeah. So, Charles, thank you for having me, and thanks. I'm glad to have you all. It's basically right now RPA is a nascent market, right? It's still an evolving market, and we are still getting to that stage where people are talking about these standards, just starting to feel the need for these standards. So, like in any industry, it goes through this whole stages of storming, forming, and norming. Right? So I think we are still in that stage of kind of building out the features and competing with each other, seeing who can come out on top, right? But this whole problem of scaling, like Frank spoke about, and like Tim spoke about, that's a real problem. And one of the key problems is that everyone is not finding the same set of features across. Some tools are better for some tools are better for other use cases. And I know it firsthand when we did it at Fujitsu. So we used to have a basket of tools, and then we had to decide, okay, which tool do I use? Because there is no interoperability there, right? And that's where I think this whole design standards I'm so excited about is, when I ran this practice, I would have liked to have this design standards so that you can just have one set of codification with the best practices, which can be used across tools. So I think that there's a need for it, but it's just that it's a nascent industry. There's a need, it's evolving, and I'm glad we are talking about it. And Charles and team, thanks for setting this up. This is
thank you for joining. As I mentioned in your introduction, Bot Nirvana is really, becoming a big voice for the community of RPA practitioners. Are you seeing sort of that same conversations thread begin to be reflected, in the identification of that need in that community?
Yes. So I think there's a lot of interest in the community for this one. So when I shared this, people are very interested about it. And, on my LinkedIn feed, there's a lot of interest around this design standards. It's just that how do we go about, getting to that stage? But I think there's two things. One is there should be a wide acceptance of this kind of standards. And second is it should be a community-led initiative, which is with inputs coming from various members or various, a diverse set of people, right? So from across the spectrum, across industries, to get an input in terms of what could these standards be, right? But I think there's a good interest, and this is, and again, great that we're having this discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Tom, you literally wrote the handbook for implementing RPA. I'd love to get your input as well. What's your perspective on the sort of potential and need for RPA standards out in the community, and where do you think some of the major players, what role could they play in helping to drive that along?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on this presentation. I think I concur with everyone else on what they've talked about. I agree that there we should have some standards for this. The irony is that this industry is not a new industry. It's been around for over 20 years, and it was considered a backwater for at least half that time. And then all of a sudden, the market just took off. And I think that's probably part of the problem of why we haven't seen the standards. Nowadays, the venture capitalists just, throw a ton of money at something, and then things go crazy. And then eventually we get to a point where there's some standardization. But I do think, given that UiPath just went public, these companies are starting to mature, I do think the time is now to start thinking about this. As to whether these companies will do that, my inclination is that I think they will, and I think these are not the types of companies we used to see 20 years ago or 30 years ago with Microsoft and Oracle trying to kill each other. These companies, while they still probably want to kill each other, still find ways to work together in an amicable way. So, and they understand, the value of having some of these standards. But I do think it'll take a while still. And there'll be anytime you have standards, and you bring a group together, it always takes time. But I do think the time is now for something like this.
Yeah, picking up on that, there's an old maxim in technology that whoever owns the standard owns the market, right? And I think that's probably remains true, even though I agree with you. I think there's more co-opetition today than there was back when people used to speak about standards that way. So it'll be interesting to see what develops. The other element here is, Tom, as you said, the industry's really exploded here in the last half dozen years for sure. And with that, RPA, the scope of tools that people look at in order to deliver these solutions has greatly expanded. And Frank, you've talked about what we're doing in terms of interoperating with folks on the process, discovery and mining, and helping to do design. More and more, we're seeing a bigger emphasis on sort of that top of the funnel, if you will, need to, with the process mining and process discovery tools, and trying to figure out exactly how people work. We think that that'd be another rich area to standardize a set of notation and language around how we describe work to be automated. What are your thoughts on sort of that element of automation and how it's changing the market?
Yeah, no, super perfect area to focus on. Can't tell you how many times we run, millions of automations inside our business process outsourcing centers, and it's all tools, all technologies, and they come in all shapes and sizes, and how these automations are cobbled together, what these processes end up doing between systems. There's varying degrees of things. What drives us crazy on the back end is not having a set of standards on the front end to kind of think through what happens when there needs to be an issue and you have to bird dog or troubleshoot something on the back end. Being able to have a set of standards that clearly kind of articulates inputs, outputs, and has a nice, easy way to wrap some of that stuff will certainly help with bot maintenance costs, will help with higher quality automations, will help with just the ability to kind of keep your arms and keep this sort of stuff running super well oiled, right? And I know I just answered that question. I just wanted to pick up on something that the panelists talked about, and it's really interesting. When we talked about that market, you heard Nandan talk about nascent, right? Nascent. It kind of feels like, it was us pushing clients to do automation for a number of years. And it kind of feels like, look, there's nothing good about COVID, right? There's absolutely nothing good about what COVID's done to us people, to business, to the entire planet. But all of a sudden, this notion of, robots, physical robots, digital robots, software robots, humans and robots, all of a sudden, that sort of chasm that used to be a big divide seems to have been lowered. And just giving folks need to operate business today, and there is this impact on humans, it certainly feels like clients are now pushing, pulling, looking for more automation sets of activities, willing to do some of the things that Tim and his organization do in and around. I've got to think about how to add some human intelligence into these things and get some machine learning models and get me thinking about advanced analytics. So I left that on the table earlier when you asked me about market, but it kind of feels like we're shifting and clients are going to be pulling and driving more of this. So standards are probably going to become a little bit more front and center. And so hopefully that helps kind of paint some more context around that.
Yeah, if I could react to that. So yeah, absolutely. A few things on the standards, and especially in relation to COVID. During COVID, the nature of work drastically has changed. Our relationship to work as humans has drastically changed. And so as we're looking at, well, what tools can help, once upon a time, I remember talking to an executive who's like, we will never, ever work from home, ever. That will never happen. This was at a previous company, and it was very never, ever, because how are we going to know people are being productive? And, I'm scratching my head like, wow, that's seeing them as the only way they're productive. But the idea of what is productive, how do you measure productivity, and what tools can you use to be more productive, that is very much on the table. Now, one of the things also, as Frank was describing, that there's lots of technical benefits to standards, but there's also a lot of human training benefits. It is really great to have a way to describe something that is not like, well, if you're over here, we call it blah. If you're over there, it's called something else. And if you're doing this other thing, it's totally thought of in a different way. So this idea of standards really helps train people in these technologies. And as we think about the push to citizen developer and how, a bot for every person, and enabling this kind of mindset of people can use bots as tools to automate their own work, having a standardized language and tool set will really help with accelerating that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess an extension of that is that there's personal value in that as well, as people has transferability of skills, I would imagine, not only between platforms, but maybe between jobs. Would you agree with that, Tim?
Absolutely. And this is also, looking at what's going on in the job market right now. That it's getting hard to hire really great people, like in finding the talent and then encouraging people to stay once they're there. Because again, COVID has created this mobility sense. So you don't have to just use automation as a way to reduce costs. You can use it as a tool to empower and train up your team to have transferable skills that they can grow their career. As people are learning and staying engaged at work, that's a really great reason to stay where you're at, so that the employer doesn't have to, take the cost of the replacement, and that's an expensive cost.
Yeah, absolutely. Nandan, one of the things that we are trying to address in the market is sort of the inherent brittleness of a lot of these RPA solutions, and we believe that much of that can be attributed to design issues or a failure to articulate fully all of the dependencies that automations actually have, and ultimately behind that at the root cause goes back to the a lack of standards and ability to adequately describe things. What do you have you seen that both in your community and in your role at Fujitsu, and how do you help accelerate the discussion around sort of increasing interoperability through standards?
I'm glad you asked, because I think I go back to my theme of nascent market because it's a new it's a new way of doing things, and so people have been scrambling to understand how to do this, and the best way people have figured out is to come in. There's a lot of value in this, so this come in and do a quick proof of concept, right? and they say, let's build a bot, let's get going. And then they build one bot, then they build another bot. And then in this whole process, what happens is that it's more about building things rather than thinking through it, right? And so that whole thinking and design aspect, actually both planning and thinking aspect, really misses out. So now I see this as an industry that people have started thinking about, before automation, what can we do, right? Before we build this stuff, what can we do? So I'm working with a customer right now, a huge telecom company, and we're talking about optimization and standardization first before we get to an automation, because automating a bottleneck doesn't help you in any way, right? That's one part of it, right? And and second part of it, once you get the requirements, let's design it, right, to understand whether we are meeting the requirements, whether we are meeting the best practice in the industry. And so I think having a standards, what happens is that all the best practices, all the things that you need to take care of, it's already codified somewhere. And also there's a common way to represent everything so that it can go across tools. So it's more about thinking about what you want to do rather than what you want to do with a certain tool. And right now it's about buying certain number of bots and implementing it. And it's kind of technology specific, but as I say, as the market evolves, I think we'll move away from it. We'll move to more of thinking, which is designing it, planning for it, and then implementing it.
Yeah, makes sense.
Charles, sorry, can I
please,
just add
Frank,
to
go
it?
ahead.
No, I mean, it's awesome, right? And what's really cool is we all come at it from different sort of angles in terms of how we support our clients. But, like Nandan's talking about, a lot of times, I can't tell you the number of times organizations have come to us and said, hey, we picked a tool, help us go implement some stuff. And it's like, dude, why'd you pick the tool? What are you automating? Well, we're not sure. We've got a couple of these processes over here. And to Nandan's point, right? Would you do that with an ERP implementation? Would you do that with a CRM implementation? How would you, if you were running a business, how would you actually implement an enterprise business applications inside your org? The ability to treat automation like that and think through that up front is super important. And it's a tough message for clients because clients want to get going. They want ROI quickly. They've got problems. Their hair's on fire. They've got tech. They've got all these challenges that they're trying to solve. But if there is a way to kind of just get that sort of upfront set of activities super wired up, it certainly paves the way for lots of success on the back end. I know Tom's got that covered in spades in his book, and we all see that sort of thing. So Nandan, just wanted to give you a thumbs up on articulating that, because that is ginormous.
Yeah, Tom, maybe I'll let you jump in there as well. What's your point of view on that? Having been closely not only watching the space, but helping companies and driving in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think part of the scramble has been COVID. So you just buy something off the shelf and hire somebody and figure it out. As you jump out of the airplane and you try to figure out how the parachute works as you're going your way down is kind of what I think a lot of people have been through for the past year. Things will start to normalize, and then they'll realize, then they'll see all this technical debt that they've created, and I think we talk about this digital transformation, but I think digital transformation happens so quickly. The debt experience, just like we create a lot of debt financially in our economy, I think we've created a lot of technical debt and legacy. And there's probably the next few years, there could probably be ways to bring in some consultants to figure out how to undo what was just put in place. So I do think for me, and in my book, when I talk about this, we mentioned like an ERP or CRM, that's a very considered purchase. It has a lot of planning involved. People know that it's pretty tough to do. And I think the same thing. If you really want to have effective RPA, you have to approach it the same way. If not, you're not going to get much value out of this technology. And I've seen companies where they'll do the Six Sigma, or they'll spend a lot of time the old school ways of thinking about their processes. And then once they're comfortable with that, then they bring in some technology and automate it. Why automate something that's an inefficient process? Think about process, become part of the culture of the company, and then go and use some technology to help out with that and push it to the next level. I think that that's a better approach. But again, I think we've been forced in a certain position because of what's happened because of the, the pandemic. But now that it's starting to fade away, I think it's time to, maybe to slow things down a little bit and think, more long term about how to get the most value out of this technology.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're mentioning Six Sigma, in technology, what is old is new again. It seems like, 20 years ago, there was the whole BPR phase where everyone was, adopting Six Sigma and doing things the GE way and re-engineering their processes. And I think that there's a new emphasis today on understanding processes as a real asset to the business. More so than ever. Maybe you could comment on that. I mean, because it seems like we're coming back around to something we used to have, skills and focus on. It was within my career, but now seemingly a generation away.
Yeah, Six Sigma, wasn't created by GE, but you'd have thought it was created by GE. And then I think the other problem, that was the great thing about Six Sigma during the 90s. Because it was GE and GE was such a great growing company. Now the associations is not so good, but it is still very powerful. And of course, there are different types of process methodologies to choose from. And it's not to say that you have to be a black belt in one of them, or, you can mix and match certain things that make sense for your organization. But at least I think just start, thinking about that. There's Dan, but going again about GE as an example, in full circle, GE's back on the upswing, and they brought in a CEO, Kulp, I think Bob Kulp, and he used to be at Danaher, and he was a huge follower of continuous improvement, the Toyota way, and built an empire. And then they brought him in at GE, and he's done wonders there. And I think, just for building a great company, a great organization, you can throw all kinds of technology at something and get nothing, get zero. But if you have, I think it's more of like, why are great companies great? Well, it's because they have great ways of doing things. They have great cultures. They have great people. And then once they start using technologies, that then, is a halo. That's going to do well anyway, because it is a great company. I don't think technology makes a company great. I think just a great company with great technology can be even better. And so, I think, I think as things normalize, start thinking about that, because there's some great companies like, what we're seeing here with GE again. They're starting to make a rebound. And I think it's part of this process methodologies that are being implemented. Seriously, it becomes and Kulp at GE, that's what he does every day. I mean, if you're at GE, you know about this. You can't not know about what's going on there. So I think this is something for other companies to start thinking about, instead of just throwing technology at it.
Sounds good. Yeah, no, it makes sense. And Tim, I'm assuming that that's not a relation to you, but
Not as far as I know.
maybe you should check your family tree, right?
I would like to add on to something Tom was talking about there, and it's I think Mind Over Machines thinks this is super important. Is yes, your process is very, very critical. And be aware of what humans have superpowers to do in that process and what your bots have superpowers to do in that process. Connecting that to as you're thinking through what is the process, super powerful. And a good example of this, we were working with an organization and they had the human way of doing the process, which was, look up this PDF and go search for different information, all this good stuff. But when we approached it with the bot, it's like, well, the bot can remember all this information instantly. So don't do it like your human does it. Getting back to a theme that has showed up. Don't create a new roadblock just with your technology. Use the technology, use the superpowers of the human, use the superpowers of the bot to really have a great process.
Yeah, so I wanted to add something there. I think, one of the key things as we do this design and come up with design standards is to have a human-centered design, right? Because, machines work differently, humans work differently. And it's up to people who design things to design it so that the machines understand people and not the other way around. And so what's happening right now, though, is that, just as I said earlier, and I think everyone said that, there's less emphasis on design and more of doing things. And then what happens right now is that more of the technical folks do the technical design. There has to be a more design from a business perspective, a human-centered perspective, which is not happening, which I think can be enabled by having a design and design standards which incorporates all those best standards which people can embrace. And also, just to summarize, I'm just one more point is that I think that that also can enable citizen developers, because the citizen developers can design the things and then send it over to a technical team which can actually build the bots.
Yeah, that's
or
a great
it can
point.
automatically be converted. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, Nandan, we couldn't agree with you more here at Blueprint. We've coined the term citizen designers because we believe how much of this actually scales and where what the achievable input of scale will be is through citizen designers who then pass, because RPA implementation is still technology at the end of the day. It can be quite complex. And the notion that business and operations folks are going to be implementing RPA solutions is it's clearly happening at to some degree in the market, but we believe that what's much more approachable and achievable is this concept of a citizen designer. And as you said, underneath that is creating a common way of working, whether that's standards driven or what. And even back to the conversation around Six Sigma, at the end of the day, Six Sigma was a design, it was a way to talk about processes. And it was actually a systematized, standardized way of doing so. And so we see that coming back and being more relevant than ever, whether it's Six Sigma or some variation of Lean and all the other methodologies that are out there for process definition and design. So that's our point of view, is that the citizen designer will be the linchpin to driving not only RPA, but more and more, many organizations are looking at automation more broadly than just the RPA implementation platforms, but a whole range of technologies that can accelerate their digital transformation. Love to open that up to the panel to get your thoughts on sort of the evolution of automation with a broader lens than just the RPA platforms.
Yeah, so I just wanted to come in there and talk about the whole evolution, because I see a distinct shift happening right now, right? We started in the 70s and 90s by doing computerization. If you remember the whole MIS and computerization, that was a kind of automation that we were doing. But there was this processes that came in, and so we wanted to do some of process management. That's where BPM came in the 90s, and we started doing business process management. And then right now we are kind of into this process automation phase. We did do business process automation or BPA during BPM, but we have transitioned over to a more automation phase now. So what does that mean? So I think that first we were computerizing. Now what we are doing is, so computerizing was some automation, but now we are automating the automation itself, which means that we're automating the way computers are working. So we used to actually have computers, and then people worked on the computers. Now we are actually automating what people are working on the computer. So we are automating the computers itself, right? So, we're coming to a phase where RPA, I think, is somewhere in that bridge between a new kind of programming from the past. What I mean by that is, earlier we used to tell machines what to do, right? And that we used to program things for the computers. But now what computers is more and more doing, especially what we call as artificial intelligence or machine learning, is that computers learn by themselves using data and tell us and tell you the algorithms and what can be done, right? So it's programming itself. So I think RPA is in that bridge. Why I say that is, going to earlier point about process intelligence, and I'm talking to the process intelligence specialist, is that with the data of people working on the computers, which is what like one of the vendors call it telemetry of work. They're actually mapping the work. Now they're mapping the work, they're getting the data. Once you have that data mapped out, you can actually automate at least a large extent of it, right? And so I think we're going to that stage where you will have, you know, automation itself automated. It will take some time, but that's where, you know, having good design standards and capturing this process intelligence in a right manner with the best practices, so that we don't forget what we have done and what we actually have a record of what things are done, and we actually manage that process. And going back to human-centered design, incorporating that design so that the automations are something what we want and what we like and what we have in control, I think is a key point.
Yeah, that couldn't agree more. Maybe I could open that up to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, Charles, Nandan, that's awesome. And I'm going to go back to a couple of things both Tom, Tim, and Nandan said on RPA. Internally at Avanade, we call RPA, you know, robotic partial automation, right? because it's been thought of as a linear set of activities. And when Tim was talking about, hey, unpack that process and let me really stack this thing together on both what a robot can do and how the human does. And what we see with clients is they're always caught a little bit flat-footed, with how much human judgment actually runs across a process in a department of call center or customer service or invoicing or finance. 2 or 3 people interact with the process completely different. Based on inputs, some may jump directly into SAP and go look for T codes to validate and process. Some may go through a portal and follow some steps. And so when you build an automation that's super linear, you end up losing some of the power user. You miss some of that human judgment. How do you account for predicting, thinking? And so that's kind of the stuff I think Nandan and Tim, it's the stuff that we're trying to encourage our clients to think through a little bit with, you know, these standards certainly help, but it's the ability to think through what real enterprise automation starts to do. And it's not the linear sort of go start here, end here. It's, you know, how does everything else in and around there get itself propagated, whether it's through the tool or whether it's through some human stuff. So anyways, I just thought it was a great point that the panelists were talking about, right?
Yeah, maybe bring another point here. Elon Musk nearly destroyed his company. I think he just almost destroyed his company, Tesla, 10, 12 times during his lifetime. But the latest time was with the factories, the automation. And robots were doing all kinds of things, and he wasn't producing cars at scale because the robots, and he put out a tweet saying humans are underrated. You know, one of the books I wrote is on artificial intelligence. You know, I think the fruit fly has like, I don't know, 150,000 neurons, and we have like, I don't know, billions, you know, hundreds of billions, and we're still not even at the fruit fly stage with AI. We really underrate our ability as humans when it comes to making decisions. And once we start getting overzealous with automation, we get in trouble very fast. Yeah. You know, so you know, embrace the human and find out how we can augment the human with some of this technology. Once we go the other way around, we get in trouble so fast. And I think that's for me one of the best lessons to take out of just observing a lot what's happened with this growth in automation. You know, we're nowhere near where's our self-driving cars along the highway right now? I haven't really seen them. You know, I can't go buy a car and just sit in the back seat, and I would get arrested if I did that right now. So, you know, we're a long ways from this self-driving organization. Humans are going to be driving for quite some time, these complex organizations, and that's just a fact.
Yeah, and I would add to that our relationship with technology as well in humans. There's an excellent book, I really love, it's in my background, The New Breed by Kate Darling, which talks about changing how we think about robotics and artificial intelligence. Instead of thinking about it like, well, it's like a human. No, it's not. You know, it's more like an animal, some kind of specialized creature that is doing things. And so as we think about the role of RPA or artificial intelligence or whatever your AI system of choice is, if you get away from the mindset of, well, it's like a human, it's not like a human. It's not at all like a human, and nor should you try to make it be like a human. Let it be what it is and really light up as the tool it is. And you know, the self-driving company, I love that comment, Tom. You know, one of the things we talk about Mind Over Machines is if you can automate everything about your business, so can anyone else. Like, you know, so what is your real differentiator as a business? It's going to be your humans. Let your humans bring that value.
Yeah, and I think.
Go ahead, Nandan.
Yeah, just wanted to add, thank you. So I think beyond all this discussion, what Tom and Tim is saying is a huge point, right? It's that, you know, we need to keep humans first. And thinking, I think, as I said earlier, thinking and designing and planning, which has been kind of missing a bit, I think we need to bring it in, right? Before it is too late, as Tom said, right? So we need to start designing these things right from the beginning. And we are just, again, going back to the concept of new. We are new, we are very excited about these technologies. It can do a lot of things, but let's step a bit back and think about these things. Let's plan for it, let's design for it, let's have the best practices in it so that we don't regret later, like Musk. So.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I just wanted to interject and remind all of our attendees out there, you know, feel free to post questions to the webinar. We'll be happy to, you know, have the panel take your questions as well through the course of this. But you know, I'd like, you know, once again throw one out to the group. You know, obviously, you know, in the past few months, there have been some big announcements in the RPA space, not the least of which was the UiPath IPO and side by side with it, Microsoft's big announcements of their push into the space. We'd love to get your take on sort of those sort of seismic kind of changes and how they'll impact the market as we move forward. Happy to toss that out to.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a cut at that since. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, it's fantastic for the market, right? And I get asked all the time inside my company by my board and by my parent companies, and Microsoft's one of my parent companies, but I get asked all the time, which horse should we bet on, right? I constantly get that, Frank, what is our strategy longer term globally for platforms? And my attitude's been the same from the beginning as it is today, right? The market will sort that out, right? It is good to have free market competition and competitiveness. And what's happening right now is Microsoft and UiPath have gotten ahead of the race when it comes to, you know, a single platform that allows for the ability to attended, unattended, nice sets of IA, sets of activities, all relatively contained, easy to kind of move in and around these complex environments. And they're starting to pull away a little bit. Is it bad for Blue Prism? Is it bad for AA? Is it bad for the others? No, because clients have made investments in those and you got to continue to maximize those. But it's nice that the market itself is moving towards this idea that you hear all of us as panelists talk about, the things that drive us crazy, which is help us facilitate the ability to link that human and machine sets of activities together quickly without having to punch out to 14 different software providers or a whole bunch of different things that we can't control and clients got to put their arms over. So from my vantage point, it's awesome to see what's happening. I'm super pumped about UiPath. I'm super pumped about Microsoft. I've always thought Microsoft had a blind spot to RPA, especially when Power Platform came on the market a few years ago. And it's great to see them shore that up because that kind of brings, you know, a real sort of single platform answer to clients at scale. So that's my attitude with it. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and to add to what you're saying, Frank, is that I think, you know, again, the market, I think, is maturing, right? So there is a lot of consolidation going on. There are people who are on the sidelines. So there's still some people on the sidelines, but some people on the sidelines jumping in, like Microsoft. Microsoft is who created Windows. And everyone is building on top of the free software that Microsoft has put out. So now Microsoft is like, yeah, let me also jump in and check it out, right? So I think it's a huge thing because Microsoft coming in is huge because they acknowledge the market And then they are going to include that as part of the Windows itself. So what happens is that all the users using Windows has access to this automation. And only time will tell in terms of how people will use it, but there is that ability for RPA to reach much more bigger audience. And it can become something like a table stakes that, everyone is using RPA, and then it becomes more about what are the other differentiating factors. But also, I think one more factor to look at is there is this whole thing that technology, all the technology functionality that people need for developing things are moving to the cloud. And would RPA be one more function on the cloud? Could be. I mean, it could be one on Azure, it could be one on AWS, we don't know, right? And could be there will be some niche players like UiPath or, who are very strong on it. And right now, UiPath is very ahead in the game, even though Microsoft took over Softomotive and this, I think in my view, catching up. But I think the progress is towards cloud. There could be this bigger players coming in with this niche players playing around it, but it still have this thing about we should have a common standard. And like I just now answered one question from an audience member, that we should have something to design as well as something to monitor, so that this complete it's independent of the tools that's used. It's more about the functionality that has to be built.
Yeah, that, and speaking of sort of the audience, and we do have some questions coming in. So I want to jump to some of those. This is from one of our attendees, and the question is, how has the COE changed in the last few years, and how will it evolve even more in the next 2 to 3 years in order to govern and design and scale RPA within these organizations?
So I think that COE, I'll just have a first crack at it. I know people wanted to jump in. So I think COE has surely evolved. I mean, it's been from no COE to some sort of COE. And what we are seeing more and more is that we started with a centralized COE, where the best practices, the people, the experts were in the centralized COE. And over a period of time, we are discovering that a more decentralized COE is helping. And it's what we are seeing is that moving from decentralized to decentralized kind of is what is a mature organization doing. And it really helps in terms of building out these automations in a nice and industrial way.
Yeah, Nandan, I'll pick up from that, and absolutely 100% agree. COE is evolving. And what's also interesting about the involvement is, at one point it was all about operating model governance and discipline around automations. Where COE is evolving today is human capital, right? It's starting to pick off and starting to think through what happens on the human side and how does an organization deal with that as they start to decentralize and move stuff out into the business. And so COE is picking up some new things. They're responsible for more than just some techie stuff on automation, and those skills are super important. And it's really helping with, organizations being able to control this stuff, especially now that we're talking about, if the tools are going to go out to the citizens, how are you going to put digital guardrails in place to control some of that activity with some of the rest of your enterprise grade sets of activities? And so that balance is a new thing that COE is starting to stay in front of, get a hold of. And, it's just like Nandan and the rest of the panelists, when we sit with a client, the first thing we pick on is let's think COE and maturity and get you there over stages. But it's evolving a lot, and it's super important.
Yeah, agreed. I would add on to that. It's starting at a COE and thinking about a COE up front, very powerful and critical, because you want to be careful that you don't just one and done. You're like, we automated this process, we're good. It's like, no, like the real value comes in from doing a bunch of processes and a bunch of the things that you're doing. That's where your real return comes in. But beyond that, also thinking through topics like governance. One of the questions in the Q&A here is around security. And yes, thinking about governance, setting up those guardrails, making sure the people who are citizen developering know how to work in those guardrails, making sure that IT and your citizen developers are playing nice together. That's super important. And so your COE isn't just like where you go to, I have a hard question, can you help me with this? It's to help people understand the technology, understand the business impact, plan for these things accordingly, and enable managers who now have digital employees, as these RPA tools come in. How do you manage that? What's the important metrics to be reporting on? Are you getting these things? This is all super important.
Yeah, I mean, those are issues that certainly security and regulatory and compliance issues is one of the things that we're trying to drive awareness of out in the RPA community, especially as many of the panelists have said, this gets pushed out in highly distributed organizations. Tom, what's your thoughts on sort of the as this matures and scales out in these organizations, how are we going to reconcile the traditional governance functions of IT with unleashing the notion of whether it's the citizen designer concept that we believe in, or the citizen developer concept that much of the industry talks about?
Yeah, I think it depends on the vertical as well. If you're in healthcare and you have these citizens developers scrambling all over the place, creating bots with your private information, that could be a problem, But if you're another company that's not highly regulated, then it's probably not so much an issue, because we had, there's a question here about security on the Q&A here. So I think it goes industry by industry, but I think, again, when I talked about earlier how COVID has pushed things and accelerated, what I think that is also done is some of this governance and security has not been given enough attention, and we're gonna pay a price for that, probably in the next couple of years, and it's just going to be a boom for consultants. That's just talking about the human. Consultants are going to have paydays for the next few years, because they're going to have to undo a lot of what's already been done, and there's going to be more of a focus on this governance and security. RPA does handle a lot of sensitive information and data. And somehow it, somehow kind of can get through the cracks and go below the radar, and not, and there's not as much attention to pay to that. And then, so there's some vulnerabilities there. So I think, on the Q&A too, someone brought up no code, low code. And we talked about, I think that's another part that's confusing the marketplace right now. Monday.com just recently went public. So I think people are saying, okay, is it RPA? Is it AI? Is it no code? And what is the difference between no code and low code? I mean, it's getting more complicated. And, it's all kind of under this umbrella of automation, but then it goes, which one should I use? What should I start with? And I think that's another big issue we're going to see. And I think that can complicate things with trying to roll out some standards, because there's so many new technologies coming in, and so many, or at least so many new buzzwords that are coming into the marketplace right now.
Yeah. Now, Charles, if you don't mind, Tom, you nailed it on security vulnerabilities. It's super important. Don't get caught flat-footed with it, right? And I see the question that's in the chat. Just a cute story to share with the group here. So, recently I was in a workshop session with a global pharmaceutical, and we had their C-suite and board, and they were talking about enterprise automation. And the person who happened to be sitting next to me was the head of security, InfoSec, for the organization. And so as the workshop's running around and they're talking about automating and governance and federating and citizen services and where to, what to, that was running its course. And at some point, just before break, somebody from IT raised the security question and said, hey, I just can't seem to get my arms around security from an automation perspective. And the session kind of, the moderator kind of brought the session to a break, and everybody left the room, and who was left was myself, the head of security, and the IT person who raised the question. And I wish I could have taped this. The head of security leaned over to the IT person and said, hey, bud, I am so much more comfortable with controlling digital security than I am with humans. Do you have any idea how many humans we have to deal with inside our organization that break security protocols? Give me an idea how to follow a digital map on this stuff. I can control it much easier. And I just thought that was one of the most aha moments for me when I think about how clients have to think through security, right? There's there's the front end piece, the vulnerabilities you talk about, but in practicality, most organizations have the ability to think through that from a human aspect. And so anyways, just to kind of paint that out to the panelists, it's really interesting. It is a topic that continues to need time, attention, care, and feeding for sure. Otherwise, it's a black eye for everybody, right?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, Frank, awesome insight and an awesome story there. So I think that's where it's more important, like Charles is saying, to have citizen designers. So people are designing things and there is specific IT people developing things. So there's a citizen designer and developer. And that's why I always keep saying citizen developer is not a good concept. And now I have the answer that, it's actually citizen designer is a great concept where people are designing the things from the business side, from a human side. And then there are specific people taking care of security, best practices, all codified in the design and being developed.
And thinking about security in multiple layers too, because you got to build it secure, absolutely. But you also got to make sure, to Tom's point, if you're in a healthcare organization and your citizen developer designer is like, well, what'd be great? Let's take that data and throw it over here. And nobody else knows that the data is getting shipped over there. You've got all kinds of problems. So that governance, super important. And again, start there. Don't start with, let's just try to automate something, see how it goes. Don't do that. Plan and treat it like an enterprise system that it is. Earlier we were talking about, you wouldn't just say, let's try out SAP. Why not? Yet we have this mindset of, oh, RPA, we can do this real fast. Let's try it out. You don't do that. Think it through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, look, this has been a great conversation. There's a good question here about sort of the challenges to actually achieving this notion of standards, and how realistic is it, to see this as an element that drives forward the conversation and the scaling of this technology out in the market. Maybe we can end on that, and we can go around the group to, for final thoughts on the discussion today, and any other thoughts you want to share on the RPA market as a whole. Tim, since you have the mic, let me go ahead and just start with you.
Yeah, I would say when we talk about how realistic, the market's got to want it. You got to drive it. And when I say the market, keep in mind, think ecosystems. Don't think just like, oh, well, the customer is buying. Well, the customer, the partners who are implementing it, the schools that are teaching this, all of this is the ecosystem. If these forces combine and say, this is what we want, this is how it's important, we are going to work with vendors who do this, you got a movement. And you got to get that energy going. No, don't just leave it up to UiPath to say, we're going to do this and everybody's going to love it. They need market forces to tell them.
Yeah, great point. Tom, how about you? What are your thoughts on closing thoughts for today?
Great discussion. Very lively, which is important. Different viewpoints. But I think there is a consensus here that we need standards. I'm in agreement with that. I do think it'll take some time for that to emerge, but the time, no better time than now to start. And I think, but I also think that from an RPA standpoint, like we mentioned before, it's a considered purchase. Think of it like an ERP, CRM. Don't rush into it. Think about process methodologies like Six Sigma or Lean or whatever you've seen out there that looks interesting. Look at security. There's ransomware announcements every day, and companies are getting hit all the time. Make sure the security is there. And finally, it's the human in the loop. Technology. We're not at the point of Terminator and machines talking to us, and we don't even we crack the Turing test and all those kinds of things. We're nowhere near that. We got to find ways to allow technology to augment the human. Yeah,
absolutely. And Nandan, I see there's a very specific question for you on the chat. Happy for you to maybe around the notion of API issues. Maybe you want to take that one as part of your wrap up.
Yeah, I in terms of API versus screen scraping, it's a big debate, and I think API first, and always API first if it's available. In terms of how to achieve standards, I think that's an interesting question. And as I said earlier, I think we need participation from the industry top people, probably a consortium which makes that happen, right? And also participation from across the spectrum, from people involved in this space, right? And I think that's where a community can help, and community can drive that conversation. And once a community has started picking up the standards, then the big people doesn't have any other option but to join in the fray, right? And I just want to leave with this thought that just imagine, we have been talking of bot stores and picking bots from the bot and using it. That's not worked. And that reason is because it's been siloed in technologies, and it's what is common is the functionality. So functionality like invoice processing is common across industries, but it is implemented differently. What if we can have reusable design components which people can use across industry? Take those best practices, including security, including all the other things, right? Which a design can incorporate and use it and build on top of it. I think that would be a huge win with which we can use any tool. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
That's a great vision, and hopefully Bot Nirvana helps us drive the push for standards. Frank, I'll give you last word today.
Sure. Yeah. And so listen, everything that's been talked about so far, absolutely agree. I don't think we're as far away from standards as people think. It takes a collection, it takes a village to get there. I think as we start to think about the areas we cover, right, from Blueprint, from us as SIs, from us as, organizations that deal with AI and help, don't forget you've got the cloud providers, you've got software providers. As these organizations start to run down their digital journeys, they start to increase the automation capabilities inside the software platforms themselves. All this stuff is moving towards this governing body set of activities. So, are we days away? Are we years away? I'm not sure, but this notion of can we get there? I think we can. And I think the forces themselves are starting to head in that direction. So kudos to you at Blueprint for getting out in front of this and helping try to think about this. Kudos for the panelist members having points of view on this sets of stuff and trying to drive towards a collection of standards. And for folks who are attending, anything that you want to do to get involved in these sets of things, raise your hands and get a hold of folks like Charles or Nandan and become part of it. And I think if we get that village concept going towards that direction, I think we can all get there. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, look, I know we're a few minutes over. I want to sincerely thank all the panelists today. I think it was a wide-ranging, super interesting conversation. I hope that those folks that joined us today enjoyed the conversation and got some value out of it. And we look forward to our next iteration of the Blueprint Industry Roundtable. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, everyone.